Welcome to Hacking HR's September event series. Today, we will be diving into some discussions around building the foundation, creating a tech-savvy HR competency and skills framework. My name is Daniela Page, and I am Hacking HR's Learning and Development Manager here with you today. I am coming at you live from a town called Cabarete in the Dominican Republic. I will be your moderator on today's event, and welcome. Jessa, you can now bring our expert panelists to the stage. Hi, everybody. Hey, welcome to the event. Nice to have you here. Wishing you all a warm welcome to our event today. And in order to get started, I think we should do some introductions. If you would please introduce yourself, tell us about what you do, and why is today's topic of interest to you? Meredith, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi. Thank you, Danielle. My name is Meredith Fujita, and I'm currently an independent consultant in HR. I have about 12 years of broad-based experience. Most recently, I'm talking to companies a lot about the topic that we are covering today. Very happy to be here as part of this very timely and important discussion. And I'm dialing in from Princeton, New Jersey.
Great. Thanks, Meredith. Nice to meet you. And Alex, you're next.
Hi, everyone. Alex, and on LinkedIn, it's Alexandra with me. So I am actually a organizational design and culture consultant for a company called Intelligence, which serves lower to middle market private equity and venture capital and all the portfolio companies involved in that, as well as I have my own consulting firm called Culture Elevation Consulting, which focuses on org design development. And then I also am an adjunct professor in IO psychology in the master's program at the Chicago School, where I'm also pursuing my PhD in organizational leadership. As far as my particular interest in this, anytime I see competency modeling, I get very excited. That's one of my areas of expertise. I'm actually, the master's course I'm teaching this semester, that's part of it. I'm teaching job analysis and employee selection. So I always get excited about anything related to this. And of course, like as that, intersects with the future of work, digital transformation. I also have change management in my background. So very excited to talk to everyone today about this. I can't remember if I said where I'm from, but I'm in Chicago.
Awesome. Well, we're glad you're here, Alex. Nice to meet you. And Charmaine, hello.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charmaine. I'm in the New York area, and I have a consultancy called Chapter 2, which focuses on organizational and leadership optimization. I like to say optimization instead of development, because optimization for me speaks about building upon. And I'm really excited about this because a couple things. One, love technology, actually majored in technology in college and have been obsessed ever since. And I truly believe that HR's advancement is intricately tied to tech. So this is why I was really excited about this panel.
Well, we're excited to have you here. So thank you. And Elisa.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. I'm calling in from Northern California, so I'm maybe the earliest on this panel in terms of time zone. I am a people leader for the last 20 years in various industries. Right now, I'm on a gift of professional hiatus, so it's been nice. And a lot of it has been about skills framework and optimizing and what's next and how do we level up the HR industry and things. So I think this is a very timely discussion as we move towards data and AI and security and all of these things, which hasn't necessarily been at the forefront of an HR skill set. So I'm really excited to see where we can balance out our human-centric approach with the data and what does that really look like in the HR world and how do we capitalize on that and really being leaders in terms of leading organizations and workforce development and things. Alex, your background and mine seem to intersect quite a bit around that competency and workforce and raising others to optimize and things of that nature. So I'm excited to have the conversation.
Thanks, Elisa. Looks like we're going to have some great discussions today. Thanks all for being here. And I'm going to get us started. So we're going to kick off with the first question to discuss. Which areas of your existing HR competency frameworks are most adaptable for quick tech enablement? And which areas pose more significant challenges when integrating technology? Who wants to get the ball rolling?
I'll go ahead. I noticed I was off mute, so I figured I would kick it off while everybody's looking for their unmute. I think some of the easiest ones may be where some of the data is quantitative and available, such as recruitment and talent acquisition, where you have a strong ATS and reporting, or maybe performance management, where you've been able to quantify that information. Payroll and benefits, that's always, sometimes we like it when it sits in finance. Let's not fib about that one. But, automating some of the software and HRS and improving accuracy and compliance and things of that nature. There's learning and development, e-learning platforms and digital training management systems can quickly enable scalable on-demand learning programs for employees. But I think I'll let everybody else answer, but I'm more interested in where do we see some of those challenges, because I think that's where we're really working on now, and we're not removing the human element of HR. And I think sometimes the conversation moves to how much can we automate, how much can we get data without, and then we forget kind of the human approach of what HR is all about to begin with.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm sorry. Did I cut you off, Alex?
No, that's fine. I was just gonna jump in, just thinking about the question, about the existing piece of it. I think that, so much of it is taking a step back and actually doing a diagnostic to understand what is your actual current state, versus making assumptions around the capabilities of your HR team, and also the enablement you have, right? What are the tools you already have access to, and are you optimizing use of those tools, right? And then that goes into, right, it's not just about being able to adapt to new tools, it's also about what is your data literacy, right? Do you even have clean data? Do your systems speak to each other in a way that makes sense? Do you know how to interpret reports in a way that tells a story with that data? So I think that's kind of one piece of it. And then I think to Alyssa's point, right, it's about all of these tools, anything related to AI. I mean, as someone who is doing many different things, I've used AI in very different ways that are all very helpful, but they'll never take the place of critical thinking skills, right? So it's understanding how and when to use them. And then I think from there, competency skills framework, right? We're talking about in the context of HR. I think it's also about, it's always a good time to analyze if your current competency framework and how you're analyzing jobs makes sense for your entire organization, right? HR should always be role modeling, so it kind of starts from there. So those were just some of the initial things that come to mind when we're talking about just starting from the beginning, right? You mentioned the existing framework. So really making sure you're doing that organizational needs analysis, and perhaps, starting with the HR team, making sure they're where they need to be, and then thinking about, like, how do we use this information, or how do we look more broadly at the organization to think about where we need to be, and then within that also, where does our enablement need to be when it comes to the tools that we have available.
Great. And Meredith, did you want to jump in now?
Alex said a lot of the same things that I was planning to say, so I think we're on the same page here, that taking a step back and understanding kind of foundationally where your team is includes, talking about competencies on the HR team. You need to have the competency of systems understanding and integration, and have the literacy around your existing tech stack, so that someone on your team can kind of take that tech stack apart and understand what each of the opportunities is, where you're duplicating, where you're redundant, where your current technology stack is not being optimized, And, in terms of enablement, there may be a cross-functional opportunity for your team to work with, IT or another operations function to understand how the HR tech stack fits within the company's systems architecture. And that competency in and of itself will, if you integrate that on your team, that ensures that the HR team is not left behind, as the rest of the company is leveraging the technology.
Great point. Anything more to add on this question?
I'll just jump in and share that, some of the areas that I do think can be optimized, but they're often overlooked, could also include the engagement surveys, compliance policy management. Those are huge ones too that can actually have this integration in it. To the point that has been made relative to the human piece, I do think something like employee relations would be a challenge in this question, because you really can't automate human behavior. You can't predict that with automation. I always say humans are the most unpredictable creatures on the planet.
I agree. All right, next up we have, what emerging tech skills do you see as essential for inclusion in a future-ready HR competency framework? And how can organizations effectively identify and incorporate these skills?
One thing I just want to clarify, and this is, I'm sorry, y'all, this is where the IO psychology is going to come out. So when we talk about competency frameworks, right, the competencies are those behaviors, and then skills is separate from that, right? Skills is, at a very basic level, like typing speed, right? So I just want to make sure to not confuse anyone. There's competencies, and then there's skills that may go within that when we're looking at like a performance reviews. As far as the competencies, though, it's really just about evolving the behaviors as it relates to, the future of work, right? With the skills, that's where you drill more into, okay, like what are the expectations as it relates to, for instance, adaptability, right? What adaptability looked like 10 years ago, you're going to have a different description today, based upon where you're trying to go with your technology. So that was just something that just wanted to kind of put a baseline there. My students would definitely be chiming in and yelling at me for not saying something. So I just want to make sure that I mentioned that.
Anything to add on that one? What practical approaches or tools can be used to assess your current HR team's tech capabilities and identify gaps in their skill sets?
Yeah, I think that surveys and other kind of methodologies for analyzing, assessing what the broader capability picture looks like on your team, but taking a step further back, I think it's it's important to have real conversation in a safe forum. That can be a better place to start, especially when you have a smaller team. I was, vulnerability alert. I was an early adopter and got really excited about the possibilities of Gen AI and my team's operations and how that would impact the employee experience. And I was very assertive, right, about tearing down day-to-day workflows and even job descriptions, and myself like kind of unilaterally pointing out places where automation was possible. And I lost a critical person on my team because I didn't take the time to understand what this meant in terms of how people were feeling about the technology. So I think get a sense of your team's thoughts and feelings in team meetings, one-on-ones, and get a sense of those motivators so you can proceed in a safe way of evaluating where they are from a skills standpoint.
Meredith, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think this goes back to what we were originally saying, is that we have to be super careful. A lot of times HR doesn't have the budget, it's a team of one, and having to take that step back and really assess where we're at as a team. What tools do we have available to us? Many times other teams have the tools. How many times has finance had a tool and we're asked to use it, workforce planning software, things of that nature, and they're not really made for HR users, they're made for financial planning, and we have to figure those things out. And so we really do have to take that human approach and, understanding how people are feeling. Think about the uproar that just happened, 9 months ago, when AI really hit the market and everybody was super excited. But then you had another group that was a little concerned. There's job security. Are we just going to run reports, or do we need HR if we can just run the ENPS and get a number type of thing? There's so many things. How many times have we looked at an engagement survey and seen the qualitative data and the quantitative data and they don't mesh? Or we know that we've done conversations, one-on-one, roundtables, stay interviews, and we're like, this doesn't align. And that's where the critical thinking comes into play, and really understanding human behavior, and that people will say one thing in a public forum, a survey, and say something else in a safe space. And making sure that we can tell that story, like Alex said, is being able to take the data, the information we know, our intuitiveness, our experience, and be able to tell a story about where that is. And that can be, sometimes it can be hard to connect those dots in telling that story, because not everything is aligning. And I think that's something that we really need to take into account, especially Charmaine mentioned, the employee relations piece and that engagement, change management, and organizational and leadership development. Those are really difficult pieces to build numbers around, because it's a human experience. And so I think we have to be super careful about that. And I think Meredith's real world experience can be super valuable for us to take note and asterisk, bold it, highlight it, in terms of what that can happen in the rest of the organization, just not inside of our team. How many other leaders may have people on their team that feel the same way, and it has not been sussed out yet?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And there are many practical approaches, right? When we think about skills audits, right? Self-assessments, even analyzing usage. But the main point here is having conversations. We're never going to replace the ability to have a conversation and the types of insights we're going to glean just human to human. I don't believe that AI is ever going to be able to capture those nuances, the tone of voice, the expression on the face, the hesitation that might be around. A lot of people are nervous, which we're human, so we're going to have our myriad of experiences and reactions to things. But the most important thing is a conversation, and really taking, in my mind, a change management approach to this, right? How do you get people on board with what's coming? Because it's here. It's not even what's coming, it's here. But before I would start assessing skills, I would really get clear on what am I trying to do? Where are the people on my team in terms of how they're feeling about this, if there is a team? Because if you are a person of one, you may not have the energy or the capacity to even take on, trying to figure out what these tools are. And the points that were made, a lot of the workforce analysis tools are really not designed for HR, especially if that's not what they were brought in to do, if it exists at an organization. So you also have to think about the people hours that might go in towards something that you don't have really to spare. So I do think usage is important, but before I even would analyze usage, I would have a conversation around how do people feel about this? What are the concerns? And then really do a change management process to get people on board if it's the direction that the company is ultimately going in.
Anyone have any final thoughts or comments about our chat about approaches? Okay, we'll move on. How can HR leaders proactively manage the digital transformation process, ensuring good change management practices that foster enthusiasm and buy-in from the entire team?
I mean, I would echo a lot of what Charmaine was saying, like spot on with any any of the kind of proactive change management you want to do. I think it really is, thinking through, first of all, what is the problem you're trying to solve, getting clear on that. Is it the problem you thought it was, or like, what are you really, looking at? And then on top of that, you need to be clear on the vision of the company, right? If you're not already in those conversations with business leaders, you should be, first and foremost, but you need to find someone who is if you are not. Because anything you do, and we know this across HR, right? But especially with this, anything you do should be in alignment with where the organization is trying to go. So that's first and foremost. And that could be, for instance, if innovation is a huge push, that's what you're going to do in this space is going to look different versus if, operational excellence is going to be the big focus, right? That's going to impact the technology that you have, the approaches, right? So I think, making sure you're in alignment first and foremost. And then I think, if you can get a pulse on, how people are feeling, if you can get an idea of, readiness for change. Think about how much change has happened recently in the organization. Are you at risk of change saturation, change burnout? How can you think about how to do incremental change if you are in that space of, having a ton of changes all at once, especially if you've had like big leadership changes, you've had some layoffs, like there's a lot of different things that, you need to consider as you're thinking about this. And then of course, the what's in it for me. I think a lot of times when people roll out big changes, they get so excited about it and they say, oh, this is going to be great for everyone, but you have to tie it to, really the individual level in a lot of ways. And what's going to be really helpful for that is making sure that middle management is especially understanding, like on board, like gets why we're doing this. So that way they can articulate it at, kind of those more junior levels. So those are just kind of some of the things, but, basic change management, you're starting with the strategy, right? You're thinking through communications, training, and engagement. And as long as you make sure that you have the strategy and the flexibility and the pivot around that, that'll be key for that. And then having those incremental wins along the way.
Any more thoughts on that one?
Yeah, this is just coming up for me as I was listening to Alex talk, but the change management frameworks themselves may bear examination. Like, are these frameworks and change management strategies that we're using, do they go fast enough? Are they designed for the modern change management that we're talking about? As change happens so rapidly, and meeting the organization where it is and being able to support that change quickly, right? In a way that surfaces real impact early and often as the technology landscape changes.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And one thing that I was thinking of in terms of, how can HR proactively, I really think that HR can do a much better job sometimes of helping with that piloting of program pieces. We may think let's beta and another area of the organization might be ready to roll out. And I think that pushing back and saying, let's get our flash mob dancers ready, by section is really the approach that would be really beneficial in a lot of cases. And then thinking about how can we be more inclusive, right? I just did a talk last week with Minds of All Kinds, which focuses on, education for neurodiversity in workplaces. And, 1 in 5 people are neurodivergent. So even when we think about how are we being inclusive, are we actually considering our entire workforce? Because if you have 1 in 5, and that's the number in workforce, then we need to really be accounting for how is this process impacting us? And if you have 10 people on your HR team, then 2 people on your team likely are. So we really need to think about inclusivity beyond the typical unfortunate just gender and racial, lens, and really think about, are we being inclusive and are we thinking about our entire population, not just the people that we want to get on board to help this, but the end users as well. And what is that experience going to be? So I really think that pilot-in programs, if it goes back to the question of how to proactively manage this, it's yes, communication is important, but if you don't take the step all the way back to understand who's my audience, what do they need, and what is the more inclusive approach that I can take to ensuring that everyone is getting the information they need based on their learning needs, it's not going to work.
Right. What role does digital literacy play in the success of a tech-savvy HR competency framework, and how can HR pros cultivate this competency across their whole team?
Something that came to mind as Charmaine was speaking, so I do work across a variety of organizations. I'll be in private equity one day and the next day I'm in a warehouse, right? So, and in a warehouse where they don't even have an email address, right? Their digital literacy, it's kind of like what they do with their smartphone, and and it's hard to know kind of where they're at beyond that. We're constantly thinking through, when you talk about communication, right? How do we communicate with frontline staff when we are in those kind of manufacturing or distribution type spaces? And I think there's a lot of ways to get creative. For instance, working with one warehouse where they have a particular technology that helps them with fulfilling orders, right? How might we leverage that for communication? Just really starting to think outside of the box as far as how we can reach people. Oftentimes, a lot of us have been in these kind of corporate atmospheres for so long. You haven't been really on the ground in manufacturing, retail. Like, I started in field HR for retail, and it was a totally different world than corporate. So part of that is actually getting out on the floor. You're not going to know how best to reach people if you're not actually in these spaces and really get a temperature on digital literacy. They might surprise you, right? They may be really excellent. Who knows? Maybe they're an Excel guru on the side, but you won't know until you start actually speaking with people and getting in on the ground floor. So really think, to Charmaine's point about kind of audience segmentation, you do need to tailor your communications, and you also need to think about, what does the day-to-day look like? How much can they take on, considering, what they have to deal with, being the front line with customers or, shipments, whatever it is. I think that's a really key piece of this, no matter where you're at with digital literacy across the organization.
Alex, that's incredibly important, right? Digital literacy is such a broad term. Like, what does digital literacy mean functionally for each of those segments that you're talking about, right? And you can have fun with this when, regardless of what that definition is or where people are in their literacy journey, when they learn a new language together, there are so many opportunities to make that fun, to gamify that, to make it a positive change. To bring that into the culture of that team, get them excited, create pages in your internal wiki, put some visual branding around it. Again, this is a new language that people are learning. So make it fun and have them learn together rather than individually or apart. Have those pop quizzes in your team meetings, and really get people excited to learn together. I think, there's massive opportunity there.
Yeah, what better way?
Dropping a lexicon on the team, like, you are responsible for learning this.
Mm-hmm. What better way to get engagement and have people be a part of it all, right? People out on the floor and get to share what they know and have it incorporated into the development of re-onboarding for certain roles or skill sets. I think that's really key. Any other creative ideas?
Just wanted to add a point on the digital literacy, to drive home what Meredith and Alex were saying. It's not only defining digital literacy broadly for what it means for that organization, that department, that team, but what digital literacy means for the individuals. So at an individual level, when you tell me digital literacy, what does it mean for me? What's my part of this? What do I need to learn? And what are the support tools that are going to be in place to help me based on any gaps that I may have between what my role of digital literacy is going to be and what the learning expectation for me is. What's the learning plan going to be for me based on where I am and where I individually need to be? Because where I might need a coordinator on a team digital literacy to be is definitely not what I would need a senior director or a VP on the team for digital literacy. And I also think it's important to then show everyone what that expectation is and what the activities are around that. Because if we're thinking about even the growth and development of people, which should always be a part of everything we're doing, them understanding for what would come next is also going to be important, right? And presenting that information in a way that resonates with not just the collective, but the individual. So how are we adapting those communications for what it is? To Alex's point and the warehouse folks, digital literacy might be, I don't know, and maybe in other groups, so I'm not just saying just for what you were describing, maybe I just need you to be able to use your phone to log into an app and add information once a week. That may be what it means. And that's the granular level that we need to be willing to go down to help people understand it. Alex talked about the what's in it for me. So with them, what am I getting out of this? So you download this app, you input these things, you'll get this faster. Or your X time is going to be reduced. It has to be personalized. And if we really want adoption.
Interesting concept as we've moved from ensuring our teams have the competencies and skills. Now we've moved over to the organization, but how are we preparing our teams to be able to have those creative ideas if their digital literacy isn't exceeding the organizational digital literacy? Who's training who at this point? And that's the piece that we really need to think about, is how are we up leveling our teams so they can have those creative group thinks in terms of how do we help the person that just needs to log into that app once a week and say something, or are we pinning something to the warehouse computer that they're logging into so that that's the communication. And being, again, we're talking about the tech and the AI and all of these things, but at the end of the day, everything we've talked about is actually a human interaction. We would need that human interaction first to actually understand where we're going with the digital piece at this point. And so again, never removing that human experience, because no one would know that the employee needs to only log into an app without having that human interaction. Yeah. And so while we're up leveling all of our digital literacy on our team, we still can't lose sight of where our employees are in that change process. I think that's super important, is our team ready, and is our team ready to go out and do that first? Because otherwise we have employees coming to us and we have no idea how to answer that. And I think that's where HR loses credibility, as we start to try and gain traction in this new digital AI forefront. And we have to be super careful of that, is that we don't get ahead of ourselves and lose credibility.
Yeah. That's really important. And I just want to clarify, the manufacturing example is the end user, but the same philosophy applies. On the HR team, what does digital transformation if I'm on HR, mean for me as the coordinator, as whatever level that is? And it has to start there. So it's the same approach in terms of what does it mean for the team? And then what does it mean for the individual members of the team? Because if that is not organized first, they literally cannot go out to the organization. So I don't care what department it is, it's the same thing. What does digital transformation mean for the whole? And what does it mean for the parts of this whole?
And if it's an expectation across all roles, specific roles, how do we build that in to measure performance as well? We have to take that into account as well. So that could be a little tricky. Okay, next question. How can organizations balance the integration of advanced HR technologies like AI and data analytics with ensuring a seamless and supportive employee experience?
Well, I think that actually seamlessly builds off of what, what Alyssa and Charmaine and Meredith were saying, right? I think to kind of bring together the point, it's, yes, in a, kind of micro context, we're talking about HR being able to get to an elevated level when it comes to optimizing use of their tech stack, when it comes to making sure they have their own digital literacy, but being able to then, understand the different, digital, needs, capabilities, and being able to foster that in an environment also evolves. I think that's kind of the bringing together of Charmaine and Alyssa. So I think that together we can look at sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. But when we're thinking about the challenges overall that we're addressing with the competencies for the entire organization, it really is taking a step back to look at the competencies that we do have. Do they still make sense? More importantly, do the descriptions still make sense? Are we still serving our entire organization in a way that's going to move us towards the vision, particularly when it comes to the technology involved?
I think what keeps popping in my mind is customization and flexibility, because it's going to look different in every organization, on every team. I think Charmaine has iterated that point a couple times, is just being really in tune with what people actually need and what teams need, and being flexible and creative enough to be able to customize it so that everybody can be engaged in a part of the solution. And remembering that technology is here to enhance, not replace. That's a very important piece, especially as an HR professional. Is, the technology is there to support us. We are the critical thinkers. We know, we're the ones observing the human behavior and can make those decisions. And how does that technology or data support what we're seeing, not replacing?
Yeah, we definitely don't want to replace, and in my mind, we can't. Now, as you were talking, what really came to mind is, how can organizations balance this integration? For me, it's answering these two questions. How are we simplifying, and how are we supporting?
Anything else to add on that one? How can HR leaders ensure that their tech savvy competency framework remains flexible and adaptable as new technologies and trends continue to evolve?
I'll start with this one. So I think that, and Alex, thank you for setting that baseline earlier on what we're talking about in terms of the term competency. So I think a lot of times organizations make the mistake of kind of this set it and forget it competency frameworks, and HR teams and all teams really, and you can really leverage your HR VPs for this, holding leaders, functional leaders accountable for visiting and revisiting their competency frameworks often, right, as things change. And if there is a competency, we'll go back to the example of adaptability, defining what that means for the current season, and finding ways to align the decisions that you're making around, upskilling in technology to the current definition of that competency, I think is really important. You kind of have to look to the future right now, but play the short game because things are changing so quickly. And as leaders, we have to take responsibility for staying up to speed and understanding what that competency means for us, first. And Yeah.
I would add on to that something that came to mind if you were talking about, evolving the competency model itself, or at least assessing if it still makes sense, is thinking about what that means for your organizational design, right? For thinking about who's on your team, what are the roles. And again, I advise leaders on this all the time. When they think about org design, they get so hung up in, or succession planning, they get so hung up on the who versus the roles. All of your roles should be in alignment with the strategy, and also like where we've been talking about it a lot, like where is the organization going? Technology is only going to evolve. This is only going to become a more important piece. So how are you also thinking about the roles you have, right? And then with that, having the conversations around, hey, this role, maybe it's a very like admin-based role, maybe shifting dramatically. Are you ready for that? What does that look like for you? Is that something you even want? So having those types of conversations, I think, is very much complementary to this. Absolutely, everyone should be given the opportunity to be able to upskill, and there should be a full plan around upskilling folks, but know that role change, role, evolution is probably going to be a key part of that. No matter whether the competencies stay the same or they change, the roles may very well shift based upon where you're trying to go.
I think that's a very critical piece. We do a lot of skills gap analysis on the technical or core skills, but not necessarily on the behaviors and the competencies that we're looking for. And so this can lead into possibly hiring for the wrong role. Is, sometimes we're hiring super quickly and we just want to get the rec out, or the manager just wants to get candidates in, but what are you really needing on the team? I'm a big advocate of what is on your team now and what do you need? What are you missing? What hole are we trying to fill? What skill, knowledge, capability? I think that's super important. And a lot of that comes in. Sometimes organizations are moving so fast that they can outgrow the current employees that they have, and vice versa. If the organization isn't growing fast enough, employees are up-leveling their own skills. But then what happens to the foundational career mapping that you already have in place? Have you updated that? Or are you just updating when you're succession planning or when you're doing hiring for one role? How often, we look at compensation bands every 15 to maybe 20 months on a regular basis as, data becomes new or trends are changing. How often are we looking at those career maps and actually assessing that we have the right skills, competencies, and, all of those things? I think that's super important, because if someone is trying to move up in the organization, if they're basing it on this career map, they're seeing, again, the data is saying one thing, but their manager is saying something else, because something has evolved in the team, the role, the organization, but the information available to employees has not actually evolved or been updated. And so, as we're communicating to employees, are we updating all the things that we already have in place, or are we just accidentally recreating the wheel in some areas?
Oh my goodness. Yes, Alyssa. Yes, 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 and yes. Like all the claps for that one. I've definitely seen that issue where that piece in terms of the communication to the employees has not happened, and that information isn't updated. So you have multiple versions of the same type of document, and people are like, what's the one that we use now? So I think that's critically important. One thing that came to mind, and as everyone was talking, and for me, the answer was in the question, right? It's flexibility. What does that look like? How are we going to be flexible? A modular design in terms of, okay, if we're saying that digital literacy is the competency that we're talking about, how easily can we adapt or swap that out? How do we build on that? So it can evolve into, okay, so now AI falls under that, machine learning or blockchain or something like that falls under that. And then how are we supporting the update then, to Alyssa's point, of all the other areas to match that? And then even thinking through, okay, what does a flexible job description look like? And what does flexibility mean? And what could that include given these things? The other thing for me that really sticks out is HR, for me, learning the power of no. We don't have to jump on every new thing that comes out. If it doesn't work for the organization, if it is not something that would integrate well, if it doesn't make sense for your community, it doesn't mean that just because it's the latest, hottest, shiniest thing that we have to pursue it. And I think that's something that sometimes we're guilty of getting caught up in it if it can be afforded, right? Not everyone, to be very clear that not everyone is on a team or even in an organization that would be able to support all these shifts. So if you are in an organization that really doesn't have the financial ability or operational ability to adapt to all these things, I also think we have to think about what is the way that these skills advance, even if that doesn't mean we get a new shiny tool every few months, right? So one, saying no. I think HR can do that a lot more. For me, no is an entire sentence and a thought in one. And really thinking about what's needed for the organization and where we are and where we're trying to go. Because not every organization needs the shiny fancy. They just might need an adjustment to what they already have and adapt in that. So we really have to think about what are we adapting and how can it be modular in any sense of the imagination, but that doesn't always mean a new technology or tool.
Yeah, Charmaine, I agree. I mean, my team would tell you that this is kind of my mantra, but the tool is not the thing. The tool is not the thing. If you don't understand what you are hiring a tool to do, then you can't truly speak to whether it's actually being streamlined, whether it's actually being automated in a way that makes sense for your team or your organization. And if you do want to tech enable, something in your workflows, is it a buy? Is it a build? Is it a borrow? To your point, many organizations of many different sizes have, kind of peeled back on budgets for things that you don't have an incredibly strong business case for. And that's something that your team needs to be up to speed on too, is if I want this tool, what problem is it trying to solve? Do I understand that workflow well enough to, say with confidence that it's actually being improved by what it is that I want to implement on the team?
That's great. Any final thoughts on our topic at hand that we want to leave our audience with today?
I can go. I think it's echoing on what Meredith shared. What problem are we solving for? That should always be in your forefront, no matter what initiative it is. If it's change, everything involves change management, right? But it doesn't matter what is happening, whether it's technology or non-technologically related. What problem are we solving for? Who is going to be benefited, and how are they going to be benefited from this? Those are the things that need to be answered. And if it is, well, everyone is using this AI tool, that is not an answer. If it's, well, this one department or team needs this and it's going to help accelerate how they are working, and out of a team, a company size of, let's say, 1,000, there are 5 of them, that may not be the investment that's worth it, right? So you really have to think about, what problem are we solving for? Who is it going to be impacted, and how is it going to be helped? So that is what I want to convey to everyone. No matter what you're doing, make sure that you're very clear about that. Once you have clarity on that, you can then build out the other steps.
That's great, Charmaine. Any other final thoughts?
I'll jump in. The first few words of this are building this foundation. One of the top competencies they look at, Corn Ferry has looked at, what makes a great leader, all of that. One of the top things is learning agility, and that stems from a growth mindset. So before you get into, they need to know, talk about the skills, or they need to know like X, Y, Z technology. They know how to, do SQL, data analytics, whatever it is. The key starting point is a growth mindset. So making sure that everyone understands what that is on your team, HR is in a great place to role model that. And then how do you embed that in your systems to really support that? And I think that's the key more than anything. That involves things like adaptability, flexibility, a lot of the words that we've been using here that will really kind of support where you're trying to go.
I'm going to reiterate Charmaine's no is a complete sentence. I think as HR professionals, some of us can be people pleasers at heart and want to say yes because that's just in the nature of our role. But if it's not something that actually aligns with the organization's vision or strategy or a need at this moment, it's okay to say no and put it on the list. I always say, let's put it on the list. And when we get to that point of where that bubbles up, then let's take another look at it. I think the flexibility is a big piece and customization, realizing that people, teams, functions, and organizations all need something different. And it's okay to shift that slightly for those groups so that you have inclusivity, which I think is extremely important. And start small with pilots and beta groups and iterate often. It's not a one and done. I think Meredith said that earlier. You're always iterating. I feel like there's nothing that we've set, oh, we're done with onboarding. It's a constant iteration because we continuously learn from every onboarding group that comes on or the feedback, and just being really open to feedback and realizing that we are just in a mode of constant iteration. And be empathetic with resistance and change. People move incrementally. Alex mentions this incremental change. People move incrementally, and sometimes organizations want to make swooping changes. And people move in, we take one step at a time, not 5. And so just really, being thoughtful of what the true human behavior is of your organization. What is the culture of learning, culture of adaptability, and being that voice for leadership, because, sometimes they get super excited, and we kind of need to be that voice of reason and using the no as a complete sentence. And this is why, and being able to have that data and experience behind us to share why maybe now is not the time, or this is not the direction we should be doing. We should really be that voice of reason and the sitting on the fence of the advocate of the employer and the employee, which can be a difficult place to be.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to share anything while we have a few minutes?
I did notice a question from Sandra in the chat around, I believe the question is around, like, how do you, help the HR team thinking from a design thinking, mindset. And it looks like, okay, Alyssa, thank you. You added some things. I think it is. So I used to do, when I led, my last internal role was leading global DEI, and I would do design sprints with my DEI council. So it's literally doing just things for people to build up that skill set. We talked about earlier, right? Like I talked about like getting on the floor with folks, right? If you've got like frontline folks, like sitting next to them, like what is their job, like standing next to whatever it is to build that empathy. Because if we think about a competency, right, that's really going to be, things around empathy, perspective taking. That's going to be really key if you're thinking about how you can leverage design thinking to be able to evolve and prototype, related to technology. So I just want to make sure that that was addressed as well.
Great. Anyone else have any more thoughts before we wrap it up? Okay, well, great discussions today, folks. I'd like to thank our panelists today for discussing our topic. And I want to welcome you all to join our next September series, which will start up again tomorrow. And I hope you all have a wonderful and productive week. So I want to say thanks on behalf of Hacking HR. We'll see you next time.